Hey everyone, how's it going? It's New Mutator, and I have another special guest with me here in the run-up to the Myth World Cup 2013. It's Drunken from Team Deer, and hey Drunken, how's it going? Thanks for agreeing to do this little Q&A with me.
Yeah, I do what I can, mate. I do what I can.
Right on. So, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about your Myth World Cup team. Like I said before, you're on Team Deer, and I know Team Deer started out as a cooperative order, with Baby Shaker at the helm. And I was wondering if you could just really quickly tell us the story of how you got hooked up with Baby Shaker and how Team Deer went from cooperative order to a competitive myth team.
Well, I pretty much met Baby Shaker playing in his favourite map, the Great Library, and landing on white falls. And he always used to play that. And from there, it was sort of like, well, um, I'm sort of still getting used to the game, sort of thing. And Baby Shaker, he always had this special thing he'd do on the map, the Great Library. And basically, he'd send his army to trigger all the waves at once. So you'd have this just massive horde of enemies attack you at once, which was not meant to be in the co-op, but it sort of increase your sort of skill. You know, you had to be on your toes at all the time. So from there, it was like, oh yeah, well, Baby Shaker, he seems like a crazy guy, but he's actually he's got the style that we want. So from there, we pretty much just played the co-op, and after I think he started to disappear after a while, not play anymore. So then I was like, well, I'll just do my own little thing with the same team name. And I mean, if he has a disagreement, you can tell me. I mean, I talked to him about it and that, and he didn't seem to have a problem with it. So from there, I just sort of done our own little tournaments on the side with a few co-op tournaments actually, just sort of in house with the other teammates, and then we went on to do the multiplayer, which I think our first tournament was the TWS in '09.
Interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about these in-house co-op tournaments? Like, I didn't even know that they had co-op tournaments, except for I know Project Magma had uh, the Mazarin's Demise kind of competition, but that's really the only one I know of. How do those work?
Well, when I say tournament, I mean like they'd have a whole bunch of us, and we'd try to like break each other's times, and basically you'd get points for what you get a certain amount of points for having the shortest time, right? And you also get points for having your army percentage. So it's, for example, if you had 100% at the end of the game, you'd get 10 points, sort of thing. So you'd rack up a number of points throughout the tournament. It was good fun, I must admit. It was only like about four or five of us. I mean, all Deer members. We didn't actually like invite anyone else because it was a bit. It was more of a trust thing because everyone else would be hosting their own games.
So who are the core members of Deer at that time? I'm assuming this is like before you guys started doing the Winter Series and Myth World Cup and all that.
No, it's about the same time as the TWS, the first one in '09. Um, Pretty much the same people. It was, no, it was Master Chief, um, Sight, uh, Vantobia, Saspa, and I think there was a few others. Sonic, uh, Peter Deneen was another one, and a few of the Saints Row members, when they were back around, would participate with us as well.
And I think I remember you telling me that you actually started out on Until Last Man Stand. I think that's what it is, but ULMS.
Yeah, that's correct.
So they're actually in the Myth World Cup 2013 as well. And so
You
what
cut out.
they're in the Myth World Cup 2013 as well. So what can you tell us about your experience with the people from that team?
Well, I'm not entirely familiar with their roster, but I think they've got a lot of good players in their team on this tournament. Like it's not the traditional ULMS team. Um, the Probably the core members that was always on ULMS was Killer King, Flick, um, Sharp Cutting Sword was another one, um, and but this team has actually got quite a good number because I think all the players from the sort of rabble players that didn't have a team have all been thrown into the ULMS team. But I can tell you now that like Killer King and I, we actually converse a lot. Like we're actually good buddies, him and I.
All right, right on. That I did not know. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced leading deer. It's a co-op order that's not specifically built for competitive tournaments. So knowing that, what kind of challenges have you faced leading this squad?
Um, Challenges. Well, I guess the first challenge was getting a team together because it's pretty difficult to try and get a team. I mean, we've had the same players for so long, so now it was sort of consolidated that and built upon like sort of year after year. But the main challenges is basically try try to defeat and outsmart players that have been playing this game for since the beginning, and most of our team hasn't been there since the beginning, which makes it kind of difficult, but at the same time challenging. I find that you it gives that sort of traditional myth gameplay of the small army defeats the bigger army. The whole campaign was always built based about that, and I find that's exactly the sort of same situation but in a multiplayer game, which I find is a perfect thing for us co-op team to be doing.
So like a against all odds kind of scenario.
Yeah, I mean, most of the other players, they I don't know about them, but we just enjoy ourselves and try to win. You know, we don't
Right.
we try, but we don't like sort of. We're all pretty close buddies. We're not gonna crack it as some of the other players might. I've seen you see like players. I don't want to name names, but they get quite angry and emotional when they get defeated.
Yeah, you guys seem pretty chill, pretty laid back, and you seem pretty easy with defeat. Like I don't know about you personally, but some of the guys on your squad, I can tell that they're just there for the laughs, just to have fun, and that seems pretty cool. But you seem pretty competitive when you get down to it.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm not. I have to be competitive. I mean, that's a responsibility as a captain. You have to have that sort of dedication, especially if you're going to hold a team together like the same players like I have. You gotta pretty much grab the bull by the horns, so to speak. Because if you don't have that sort of edge in your head and all the sort of unit trades and have that sort of extra commitment, then your team will fall apart. Then you'll have like a rebel force, people not showing up, or you'll have a fallout with some of the other teams that are way too competitive with each other. And I mean, I listen to a lot of the advice that the other guys give me. If we try to mix up our strategies and have good fun with them, at the same time, we're not gonna pick some really terrible strategy and so like, oh yeah, well this will make it challenging for us and end up losing. You know.
Yeah, so I imagine that's pretty that's a challenge in itself then trying to keep that edge. Um, yeah, so that's one of the things that I wanted to get into just a little bit is what what kind of knowledge do you have that you think helps you perform against, some of these teams that have been competitive for a while, comprised of competitive players? Like how do you approach that?
Well, I guess I've been playing video games for since I was about 4 years old. So, I mean, I was way back when the first Zork on the commands you had to type. Um, Pretty much, I've been gaming a lot of games. I mean, I have like a large collection here of like 60, 70 plus games, and one of the most competitive games that I played was StarCraft for a long time, and I pretty much got myself up to I think 65, 66 in the Australian Asian server, which is pretty impressive in its heyday. At the same time, when Myth on Bungie was still around, this is what I was doing, playing StarCraft, and then I sort of transferred those tactics and skills involved, and it's a bit difficult to compare those two games because there's a lot more micromanagement in Myth than there is in StarCraft. Because in StarCraft, you got to, without sort of going too much into detail, I guess, about StarCraft, you
No,
have
go
to
ahead.
base. You have to build a base. You have to manage your resources. You start spending points, resources, let's say there's equivalent of points for a myth player. Then you can't get those points back. So then the other guy might have a whole army of counter units to kill you. So then you have to think, oh crap, I need to build another base, or you either expand technologically or you build an army and attack quickly. There's a lot more strategy overall in terms of that perspective in comparison to Myth, where you have an army, you spend the points, that's all you get. You get limited heals, so you can't just pump out units on a macro scale like you do in StarCraft. So, I mean, there's the two differences, but at the same time, the strategy and the tactics involved haven't changed. You still got to flank. You still got to keep your units healthy. You still got to take the objectives.
All right, excellent. So I was actually curious. So this World Cup, I was actually curious if there was a specific team that you were looking forward to playing or meeting, I should say.
Oh, probably maybe the Wu Tang gang, and probably Thundercocks is the other one. I probably enjoy having a go at, because I'm interested to see how Thundercocks is traveling these days.
Yeah, I would be interested in that as well. Um, let's see. So you're actually kind of a relative newcomer to Myth compared to some of these other people that play this game. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience of, you know, uh, discovering Myth and what drew you to it in the first place?
Well, I played Myth 1 back sort of when it was first released, and just the single player. I was a bit young to get into the multiplayer stuff. And then started doing the StarCraft game and doing all that at the time. And then I went shopping one day, and in the basement, bargain basement bin was the second copy of Myth. I'm like, hey, there's a sequel. I want to see what the ending's like. So I bought it, and then I went back home, played the single player, and then I was with my friend, guy named Ben, and he's an Irish guy, and we're like, oh well, I'm playing this really cool game. Like, here's the ending. Obviously, so you defeat Soul Blight, and I'm like, well, let's try the multiplayer just for a laugh. Like, I wonder how many people are playing multiplayer this day and age, because it was 2008 at the time. Like, oh, which idiot's going to be online this time? We log on to the MariusNet server, and there's like 60 people playing in the middle of a tournament. And, like, I mean, I just joined the ULMS when they started to get the registration going. But that's how I got the whole name Drunken Irishman. It was because my mate was Irish, and I made this account for him, and but he didn't like the game as much as I did. Um, so I ended up just basically hijacking his account instead of making a new one.
Yeah, because you're not Irish. You're actually from Australia.
Yeah, that's pretty much the funny thing about everyone calls me Irish. I'm like, okay, I'm not Irish. I don't even have Irish ancestry, but that's funny.
Yeah, that's that I always thought that was a really interesting like, cuz I never really understood that either. And so that's interesting hearing that story. So another thing too is you have this competitive streak, and that's kind of led you to get into, a couple tiffs with various players in the competitive community. And I was curious, like, you've got to be aware of that. To what do you attribute your somewhat controversial reputation? Like, is it ego related? Like, what's the deal with that?
Well, I guess it's a touch of the ego a bit. I mean, I try to kill that out of myself, but it sort of comes back after the whole StarCraft thing, because I'd say they're a lot more competitive, aggressive, I guess. They do a lot more verbal abuse because there's a lot more going on. You have to manage a lot more. I find that the community getting smaller, there's a less less aggressiveness. But the people that I annoy, I guess, I don't mind. It's like, well, in the end, I'm finding that these like people like to talk a lot about their history, and their like they won like 4 tournaments in the Myth World Cup and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, it only matters every year, just like any other computer game tournament. It only matters in this year, not the year before. Makes you a better player, it looks like it, but in the end, I mean, our team is still the same. We still have a active roster. So in the end, eventually, these hot shots, I like to call them, the five ballers, they get a few of them will stay on, but you get players like Kohan and Shinko, and you hear all these stories about them, and they're not coming back. They're a long gone history, and people like to talk them up, and I respect their gameplay and all their skills, but that's the past, and it doesn't matter anymore. It matters now, and eventually we might end up being the only active roster, like of players that are of a decent skill. So we'll be end up Myth World Cup winners eventually. And that's the way I see it. I mean, eventually we'll be capable to take down five-ball teams.
So, Deer is a legend in the making, is what you're trying to say.
Well, we're solid all the way through. A lot of these teams are made up of um, some really, really good players, but they're not like a solid team. They change there's like I think a recent forum post said that there's like three teams and all the same. They're all the same players. They just switched teams, pretty much. But eventually, those players are going to dwindle, and they're going to need fresh blood, just like a football match or a rugby match, or yeah, what's it called? The American football. You need fresh blood to start training them up to get rid of the older players because the older players are getting too old to run.
Interesting. So, yeah, that kind of segues into my next question, and I wanted to ask you like how, in your experience, how hard was it to pick up Myth compared to other RTS games or other games in general? Like, how difficult do you think it would be for somebody just discovering Myth to pick it up, to get comfortable with the control scheme, and just to excel at it eventually?
I find if a new player was to join Myth, to be honest, I think it's the most discouraging way for them to join Myth at the present moment, especially with at this time the server's down, which they're fixing. But one of the main reasons is there are a lot of old players. They don't really care. They just do their own thing. They teach these new players, but they don't hold back. They're not like they know every trick in the book, so it's very difficult for a new player to come in and go, "Oh yeah, well I learnt this trick off this guy," but the next guy he faces knows the second sort of counter to that. So he has to learn that counter, and then there's another counter for that. For example, the he heals his white, gets a few goals, and uses the goals pass to defend against the enemy, the enemy's goals, which is a true. I use that as a recommendation to any new player to use the goals as a defensive mechanism against professional, like 12-year-old playing mythers, to use them as sort of to stop their pass from hitting your archers, so to speak. But then they just get the next counter would be to like shoot a few flame arrows, and they just can't handle that sort of the pressure, I guess. So eventually, like it took me about 3 months or so, I'd say, to get sort of fairly decent. But you gotta really like put your head down, I guess, to get up to a certain scale to like actually take on players that have been around for 12 years. And I mean, it was a lot of deaths, a lot of casualties, a lot of a lot of defeats, and even now, like I don't. You'll find that when I play a lot of games, I'm not really serious when I play them. I play them uh, for the challenge. Like I'm very, like you've said in a previous cast, that I'm very aggressive how I play because if I wanted to play conservatively, then I find that quite boring. It's like, well, anyone can like sit back with archers and bulk it up with the melee to defend. Anyone can do that. But it's another thing to take it to that next step, to put someone on their toes on the offensive and take them out with when they're holding the hill. It creates a challenge in itself, and that's the sort of thing I like I like to do, is to make it difficult on myself, I guess. And people think that I'm nuts about this, but it's makes it much more fun. You don't waste time mucking around with things, but at the same time, I might have like one of my classic things to do. Is I hold all my units back, um, and wait and just sit there and wait and see what happens. I'll send a few scouts and I'll just complete. This is what I'll do to a really tough player on a tough team. Is I'll just see what they're doing, and then then I'll like sort of direct our teammates to do things because I know exactly what counters to do as I've scouted their whole armies and all our armies in the same spot. So we're not going to get outmaneuvered or flanked and stuff. I mean, and that's what I mean about new players. They come in and to this net because there's a whole process as well. You got to register, you got to patch the game, you got to download all these plugins because a lot of these older players use third parties, uh, third user maps. So that means that's another website that they've got to go to and download. Plus, they've got to change the on the multiplayer the different host now. There's a lot of things, and if you're a new player, it's quite incredibly difficult to get into the game.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're basically saying that I guess map awareness kind of translates really well to success in Myth, maybe compared to other games, like just being able to have that information about the enemy location, their unit mix, and whatever movements they have. You're saying that that's kind of your approach to captaining deer?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't always use the same tactics. Sometimes I want to do a rush. Sometimes I might want to go all out on all out on defense because we've like lost, like for example, if we've lost like the 4 games and we're eliminated out of the tournament, we're like, well, we'll either go out with a bang or we'll just like defend this giant hill and stop them from winning the game and we'll see how long we last, stuff like that. Like that makes it good fun, but at the end of the day, I mean, it depends on what there's different teams, and because the community is quite small, I can sort of pick out the different personalities without sounding like some sort of professional psychologist. I can pick out that this player or this team, they're quite confident. They know what they're going to do. They know they have a higher skill advantage than us, so they won't muck around, So then you've got to sort of build up a strategy around that, I guess.
Uh-huh. So yeah, that's interesting. Like I'm curious like what kind of examples you might have of like pegging various competitive players, like how that translates to, what influencing your subsequent actions in the game.
Well, you can tell by a number of reasons. I'm not a psychologist. I put this out, but the easiest way is the way that they talk on the chat. You'll find that they either will talk a lot if they're overconfident, or they just want to psych out a player. The second one is they'll have a higher percentage in their armies because they know that that player's really well good at playing, or he's on a winning streak, or he's doing really well. So what I do like to do um, is not pick on that player, but I either have everyone focus down on that player, take them out of the equation, or kill off all these allies. Just like you're playing a role playing game or something. There's a troll and his ogres, and or his goblins or something, and you kill all the smaller guys, and then or you just cut the head off the snake. It's the same thing.
Interesting. Okay, so let's see. I'm having trouble reading my writing. What's your favorite co-op map? Since you started out as a co-op player, I'm sure you played plenty of them. So, what are some favorites of yours? Recommendations, I guess, for people who are into that sort of thing.
Well, probably the most classic one that we always play, the deer players always play, is Across the Geol 3. Because it's just a very simple, um, easy downloadable one. A lot of players have it. But My personal favorite would have to be what is it called? Grave Tidings. The plug-in Grave Tidings, Phantom Hounds. There's a level in that plugin called Bloat, which is quite fun. Lots and lots of gas, lots of whites, and like when you start the game, you're like, there's a dwarf. You got two dwarves, three archers, two berserks, and a journeyman in the middle, and you're totally surrounded by gas. So you got to actually like blow your way out of the gas as soon as the map starts, and like running around constantly trying to basically. There's like 6 or 7 flanks non-stop of ghasts, and you have to kill the shade, and that on that map. But that's a really good fun one. Uh, the Seventh God is another good fun one. And the probably the other major plugin that I like to play is this one called Freedom, which is hilarious to play, but it's quite interesting because it's all voice acted, which is pretty impressive for a plugin. But all the voice acting is done by like 6 to 8 year olds, so it's quite entertaining when you got a little kid like bashing his drum, going "I'm going to destroy you" instead of the warlock just shooting a natural fireball. It's good fun.
All right, so let's see. What are who are some to you? Who's the most overrated myther today? I mean, this might not be a really fair question to ask because, the myth community is so small. So, but I figured you'd be really opinionated, and maybe this will stir up controversy, and that'll be who's who's the most overrated myther, and also too underrated mythers, if you can think of any.
It is a difficult question because I never really find people overrated as such. I find when I say overrated, which comes out bad in my interpretations when I get into conflicts with people, I find like for example, I find Giant Killer General to be overrated as a player, but he's an excellent player. It's not. There's no question in that community, but like this is you bring someone like Kirk into the equation, and I reckon Kirk would be able to defeat him. It's um, same with like Kriniak. I thought Kriniak was a terrible player, and then I sort of started to see that he's actually a good player. There's a few, and I mean, everyone has their good days and bad days, and I mean, I found there's a few players that I find probably Begrada. Homer, there you go. Homer, I find him to be terribly overrated, and then this will get into send me a few love messages just because I want to make a controversy. I find Homer because Homer started at the same time as I did, right?
Right.
I think he did. Oh wait, and everyone seems to give him praise, but I haven't seen him around lately, and. Hmm. Yeah, I'd probably say most of the players aren't overrated. I um,
Yeah, it's kind of hard because
it's hard to describe. I'd say
yeah,
yeah.
compared to like
Uh,
people who have never played before, even underrated players, even people who are considered newbies are quite good compared to people who with no experience of the game. The learning curve is that steep, I believe. So, it's a difficult question.
Probably if I could think of uh, the most overrated is probably Thor and Wayward One.
Really interesting. And any specific reasons why?
We find that Thor likes to take like the majority of the percentage, and then he'll captain a game and he'll do his rush attack. And the thing about rushes is they either work very effectively or they destroy you. very quickly. So by him having the most percentage in any game, he'll always have the highest damage, the highest kills. He'll also have the highest losses if he loses as well. And as for Wayward One, I find him on. He seems to have his good days and bad, but he seems to credit himself more and more, I guess, than a lot of the players. For example, last year, or this year, I think it is, the last tournament that we were in, he started to credit himself a lot of for um, for winnings and stuff, and the statistics weren't there. It just didn't match up.
Well, hopefully, if we continue using Gate of Storms, we'll be able to check out those statistics aggregated so we can kind of have a somewhat objective metric for measuring that. So you mentioned Kirk earlier. There was one year where he actually teamed up with you guys. How did that happen? Like, what's the story with that?
I actually asked him to team up with us because we need. I mean, I don't have any issues with old school players. I mean, I like them, I respect them, and one of the reasons why sometimes I don't is because they don't help out the new players. That's one of the issues I said before about MyResNet about new players is they don't help them out enough. And Kirk actually agreed. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'll join your team. You know, you're a bunch of cool guys," and he did. He helped us out. So and on that year we had Liger as well, except it turned out to backfire at us with Liger in our team on the last game, sadly. Um, and sadly for Kirk, yeah, I haven't seen him for a while, but he's still a cool player.
How did it backfire for you? Like, what's the story? Because I don't believe that I was around for that year. What year was that anyway?
I think it was 2010. I have a video somewhere, but basically, Ligo was our captain. Um, last, well, I think it was like the third game, a deciding game, because we lost the first two matches, so we needed to win at least one. And it was a map where Solus was the unit. The Solus unit was very important to have, like Drowned Kingdom or something, because of the terrain. And he decided to get like all Malay and I think Fetch or something. Took like 80% of our units and suicided them. No joke. He suicided them into the enemy army and sort of host dropped, and cost us the whole tournament.
Hmm. I guess maybe he was giving up or something like that. Maybe he had enough. That's interesting. I didn't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. That's just why I don't. I personally have issues with the sort of older players. Is if they're not on the winning team, then of course they're gonna crack it, you know. And they're like, why did we lose this game? You know, like how could you lose?
Interesting. So, if anybody were to pick up Myth, in the bargain bin or whatever, they stumble on it online. Maybe they used to play it back in the Bungie Net days. What kind of advice would you give to them? Like, what would you leave them if they were listening to this video?
Well, I'd say start with the co-op and stick it on legendary. Play it at the co-op, and because now that the new 1.8 feature has a narration, you can get the other players that have been in the game for a while to play with you with the narration, so they actually understand the whole storyline as well. Because that's also pretty integral to any game is the plot, I guess. Especially for um, especially for a new game or a role playing game. You need that sort of motivation. You want to see what happens at the end of the story, you know. But I'd say, yeah, you got. It takes time. You can't just play it for the first 2 days and think that you're gonna be the best or know all the moves or know how to control units. It takes time, and if you pursue it enough, it'll reward you. It's a long-term reward, and I think it's more rewarding than any other game I've played. That's probably why it's got a community that's been around for so long. Is because of this reward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that I have to agree that it is a it. There's something about it. I don't know quite what it is, but there's something like really abstract and like kind of cerebral that engages my mind on some level, and I'm not quite sure what exactly that is. Do you have any insight into what makes myth so I don't want to say addictive, but like what is what's the draw to you?
Without making make it sound really funny, it's just like gambling. You know, it's the
It's kind
risk
of
and
random.
the risk and the reward.
Yeah.
You know, you risk a flank, but the reward is if they're not prepared, then you'll win. You know, that's the risk and the reward. And at the same time, there's a risk always that your pus or your dwarf bottle will dud. There's a risk that your own artillery is going to blow up your own units. You know, that's. But at the same time, the reward is you defeat them. You know, like it's like yes, I did this. You know, against all these variables that could have happened, but in the end, I've won.
Well, excellent. I guess we're gonna end it there. Thanks so much, Drunken, for agreeing to sit down with me and do this. And yeah, well, I hope to see everybody in the next video.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just hope before I go, I just
Yeah.
hope I haven't upset a lot of the old school players.
I wouldn't worry too much about that. Okay, that's gonna be it for us. And yeah, we'll see you later.
Ciao.